So we're recording and live.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. We've started the Zoom meeting. We have not yet called the Newburyport Historical Commission meeting to order. We'll do that in just a minute. We'll give time for folks to get all signed in and everything. So we'll just allow a minute or two for that. Okay. Caitlin, I'm sorry. Do you happen to remember who was speaking on the Buck Street property? Who was representing that one?
For 5 Buck Street, we have Benjamin Becker, and I don't see him yet in the attendee list.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I was hoping we get one more commissioner on board, but I don't see him, but that's okay. We do have a quorum, so we'll get started. And just a second here, let me make a note. Okay, about Mr. Mark Cendrone. Okay, and we'll get started. So this is Chair Glenn Richards. I'll officially call the meeting of the virtual meeting, that is, of the Newburyport Historical Commission into order for the 13th of July, 2023. This is a virtual Zoom meeting, and please be aware, like all such meetings, it is being recorded. Pardon me, a little frog there. So we'll start with a roll call. We have Commissioner Andrew Bernhard.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Biff Baus.
Here.
Thank you, Biff. Joe Morgan.
Here.
Thank you. Our newest member, Ed Neumer.
Here.
Thank you. And Chair Glenn Richards speaking. So we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 members present. A quorum, a minimum required quorum is 4. So we have a legal meeting here. We do have 3 commissioners absent. So Mr. Neumer, who is our newest member and a quote alternate, it will function as a regular member tonight since we have some members absent. And I've asked Ed if he would be so kind as to just give himself a very brief introduction, and then we'll get started with the agenda.
Okay, great. Thanks, Glenn. This is Ed Neumer, and I moved to Newburyport with my wife about a year ago. We had previously lived in Andover for 35 plus years. I retired from a career in telecommunications sales. Our daughters had grown and left the house, and we selected Newburyport as a place to live. And I was very interested in getting active in the city. Went to the open house and met with different groups, including Glenn and the Historical Commission, and applied. Have great interest in the preservation of the historical value of the city. I've always lived in places that have had a fair amount of history. Andover did, and I grew up in Marblehead, so I'm kind of familiar with the older cities and towns in New England. I look forward to contributing.
Thank you very much, Ed, and we look forward to your participation, and appreciate you stepping forward to volunteer for this and donate your exorbitant salary that you get from this to charity. Joke. Okay, so let's get started. We'll probably have public hearings later on. I'll give the rundown for how those are conducted at the appropriate time rather than taking the time now. We have 2 demolition delay applications. Do I do the review now? Let me do just a real quick review, especially where we have a very new member, although we did kind of go over this a little bit with Ed this morning. There is a flow chart which is available to you all, and the only thing, it occurred to me that a better way to understand this demolition delay process is that it was originally written from a point of view of preventing demolition. So at some point, there's a quote demolition plan review, but it's also a plan for what's going to be built on the spot or in the area where there's demolition going on. So it's really both. Anyway, the first decision we need to make is to decide if a structure is historically significant and to be considered for preservation. If we don't feel it is, we might determine that it's not historically significant, or that it's historically significant, but perhaps it's in such a state that it's not considered for preservation. So if it is considered for preservation, we move on to the demo plan review. That's when the applicant explains what they're demolishing, what they're building, and we then have a vote on whether it's, quote, considered, whether it's preferably preserved. What that means is that it's preferably preserved so that we don't want to have any demolition, and there's a 12-year demolition delay, hence the name of the ordinance, sorry. However, if the plans that the applicant presents, either as is or with some conditions that might be acceptable to both the commission and the applicant, can be agreed to, we can have a motion right here at the same meeting to accept the plans and lift the demolition delay, and that often happens. Or it also often happens that that happens at a couple meetings down the road if there's more significant changes required to the plan. Okay, so with that, the first one is a little bit unusual. This is 5 Buck Street. This is actually kind of in my neighborhood near the little, what's that called? Cushing Park, I think. A structure that was before the board in 2019. And at that time, we voted that the structure was historically significant, but we did eventually approve some demolition plans. I honestly can't remember if they needed to be altered or not. I do vaguely recall that discussion, and I remember that at the time that there was some discussion that what the owner needed to do was creating a bit of a departure from the traditional styling of that period of house. However, the house had already been significantly altered from that design, so it wasn't making anything worse. And in fact, we decided that overall it was an improvement. So that was a little bit of history that most of you don't have. Is there anything that the applicant would like to say regarding whether they think there's any, well, I assume, first of all, Mr. Becker, let's see if he's here. Is there anyone here to speak to this particular application? I see Pam Armstrong's hand went up. Can you enable audio for Pam, please, Caitlin? Thank you. Okay, Pam, so you should be permitted to speak. You might have to unmute yourself on your end, however.
I think I'm okay. Is
Yes,
all
we
good
hear,
right now?
Yep, we hear you fine. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. Yeah, Ben should be here. I did actually have the message from him that he was coming, so maybe it will make sense to take us out of order. But
okay.
But I'm the owner. My husband Adam and I own and live here, and I guess if there are questions, I can certainly do what I can to answer.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this: were you going to present the plan to make this change, or it's a relatively small change, or did you want Mr. Becker to do that?
Ben was going to present it. I guess. I mean, I can't speak to like the building details of what he's going to do and what that might mean to what you guys could understand, but I could certainly describe what's going on. Okay,
well, maybe we'll take your suggestion, and we can flip the order because I see Mr. Douglas Jack. He might go by Doug. Caitlin, why don't you enable his audio, and you can.
Hello.
Yes, hi, Doug. Can I call you Doug, or do you have a preference?
Yeah, Doug's great.
Okay, and Pam, your hand is still up, so you can probably put that down now in the Zoom meeting. And if you could mute your mic for the time being, that'd be great. Okay, so we have Doug Jack on the line here. I believe you're the architect. Is that correct, Mr. Jack?
Yep.
Okay, so this is 8 Forrester Street. It's down towards Merrimack Street. So it is on the district data sheets as contributing. Side hole Italianate house, goes back to the late 19th century. So Doug, I can't recall if you've been through one of these hearings before. as I said just a minute ago, we first determine whether the structure is historically significant and to be considered for preservation. And if the answer to that is yes, we'll go on and take a look at your plans for both demolition and rebuild. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, this is my first time through Newburyport's process, so excited to
Okay, well,
engage.
Okay, so I see you've provided some slides that have a bit of history. Do you want to say anything about the structure itself and its how you would present its historical significance or lack thereof, for that matter?
Sure. Caitlin, if you flip forward a slide, this is the general context in the contemporary neighborhood, but if you go forward, the next page is the screenshot of the historic district data sheets. You can see
Right.
some of the technicality.
Right.
It said circa 1875 to 1885, but the homeowners who were also on the call had a historic report prepared so that they could put a
Mhm.
plaque on the front of the house. And so we have much more detailed information. The house was purchased around 1875, and by 1880, it looked like it was completed construction. So about
Okay.
1880 completion. It's side hall Italianate, as it says there. If you flip to the next slide, Caitlin, I included a couple of historic maps for context that does play into the design proposal for situate our proposal. The homeowner is looking to do a small sunroom addition. So that's what we're here to look at today. So the historic house is pointed to in each of these maps. The left is 1884. You can see there's a large brewery nearby, and then a large, presumably wooded lot behind there that was kind of a appendage of a residential lot against Ashland Street. And by 1924, the brewery was gone and it was further subdivided. But to this day, there remains a large sort of wooded lot or extra sized lot behind the site.
Mhm.
And if you go to the next page, Caitlin, these are the current photographs of the house. This is as you approach from the ocean direction. If you go to the next slide, I did a little bit closer and pointed to kind of your street view of where the proposed addition is. It's on that rear single story volume. And you can see from that historic map, both 1884 and 1924, that the majority of that rear single story wing was on there from the get-go. It's not a later addition, which the volume sort of suggests. If you go forward another slide, Caitlin, this is the approach from the other direction.
Real quick question, Mr. Jack. Any idea when that dormer that was, I would feel almost, that was almost certainly added subsequent to the original construction, any idea as to when that might have been put on?
Let's see. I don't know the exact vintage.
Yeah.
The homeowner just texted me 2000. It was
Okay.
added.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep. So, and then Caitlin, if you go to the other approach, you can see it in context there. It's the style of the street in general. And then the next slide shows the house kind of closer up as it exists today from all four angles. And the slide after this begins the design portion. So I'll pause.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. Anyone on the commission have a question for Mr. Jack? Hearing crickets here. Okay. All right. Anyone have anyone like to make a comment or a motion to that the structure is historically significant and should be considered for preservation?
I make the motion. It's historically significant and preservation. Andrew?
And considered for preservation.
Seconded by Joe.
Okay. Okay. Hang on 1 second. You're ahead of me, Andrew. Thank you, Joe. Hang on a second. Okay. All right. So just for clarity, the motion is that the structure is historically significant and should be considered for preservation. So a yes vote means you agree, and we would move on to the demolition plan review. If you disagree, you think it's not historically significant or and should be considered, then you would vote no. So we'll go around in the usual alphabetical order, which means we start with Commissioner Bernhardt.
Yes.
Thank you. Biff Baus?
Yes.
Thank you. Mark Sandrone is still absent, correct? Okay. Joe Morgan,
Yes.
thank you. Ed Neumer,
Yes.
thank you. And the chair is also in agreement. So that makes it unanimous with 1, 2, 5 yeas. So that motion passes. So, Mr. Doug, what that means is that we take a look at your demo rebuild plans and we go from there. So you have the floor once again.
Okay. So slide 8 shows the proposed site plan. Again, it's a single story sunroom addition. The floor plan of the house currently is, the public spaces are on the ground floor, kitchen, living, dining, and then there's a smaller bedroom that historically was likely the servants' quarters, and then the upper floor is exclusively bedrooms. So the living space is rather cramped and choppy, as a house from 1880 would be without significant interior renovations. So we're looking to expand the ground floor space a little bit. So what we propose is the darker shaded volume on this diagram. The lighter shaded volume is existing house footprint. The hatched zone is the paved driveway to the left there. Forester Street, the street that we were reviewing photographs from, is on the bottom of the sheet here. There's an existing deck that's just inside of the fence against Forester Street. So we're preserving that deck, and we're proposing that the addition is way at the back of the site. It's both for respecting the historic domain and minimizing the visibility from the street and really being secondary to the primary volume against the street. And it's also for the homeowners to preserve their green space in their yard and not kind of have this big volume, steal a slice of their green space. If you go to the
Sorry about
next
that.
slide. Oh, that's okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Go to the next slide, Caitlin. This is the elevation view from the yard direction. It was the right, from the right side of that slide, the last site plan slide. On the top is the existing elevation. On the bottom is the proposed. The top of the ridge would align with the top of the ridge of that existing single store volume. And the eave of the fascia would also align with that existing volume. So the scale is very much so tied into that existing height. Let's go to the next slide. This is the view from the rear of the property. So you effectively don't see it from the public domain, but it's the only other vantage point where you do see the proposed addition. Top is existing, below is proposed. Go to the next slide, Caitlin. This just shows the addition frontally because those other views are oblique relative to the proposal, given that it's at a angle to preserve the yard space. So it has a run of windows that are double hungs 2 over 2 to match the primary window on the existing house. They wrap the 2 sides that face the street, and then on the back side, which is the bottom north elevation, is opaque. That's the side that faces the fence. So the homeowner will be able to move their kayaks and things that you don't want to see from the yard of the street to behind the house instead of having it on their yard as they do currently. If you go to the next slide, Caitlin, this just shows the proposal more 3-dimensionally, so you grasp the massing. So the left view is kind of an aerial from the yard. The top is existing and the bottom is proposed. And then the right view toggles a little more towards the back to show that rear elevation that doesn't have any fenestration on it. These also show the existing double hung 2 over 2 windows on the main house for context. And we matched the proportion of that on our typical unit on the addition.
Well, thank you, Doug. That was very good. And I thank you for providing such clear, existing and proposed views next to each other. It makes it much easier for us to see what is being proposed and to have these multiple renderings. Often we don't have any renderings. So let me express my gratitude and appreciation for that little bit of an extra step there. So we will, this is a public hearing, so we'll allow public comment on this, but maybe before I do this, are there any questions for Doug from the board? I see Biff has a hand up. Biff, did you have a question?
Yeah, Just a quick question about, and I think you may have answered it, but the angle of this proposed addition, that was to sort of maximize the yard space. Is that the idea, or what was the
Yeah,
choice of that?
as I always do in my design process, I start with multiple schematic massings and we discuss the pros and cons of each. Some of them have to do with lifestyle, you know, you're not seeing the interior footprint, but that's their kitchen that this is attaching to, and then a laundry room and mudroom to the very tail end of that single story existing wing. So we're trying to tap into the kitchen and have a flow from there, not tap into the mudroom and laundry room on the very rear there. But they love their yard space. They have dogs, the dogs run freely. They have wonderful plantings that they look out at. And there was one massing that's a similar scale, but orthogonal to the existing. And it just really kind of occupied the void of the yard. And then I had a third massing that was kind of glommed onto the historic. And again, it sort of took over the yard rather than embracing the yard. And secondly, it really disturbed the existing structure a lot more than this. This is primarily away from the existing structure. It'll be on sonotubes, so it wouldn't even undermine the existing rubble foundation and have to have a really aggressive connection to the existing. It'll very lightly touch at that small end of the proposed addition footprint, and even the roof is overframed on top rather than removing existing structure and combining. So this scheme of the ones that we looked at seemed to balance best the being delicate to the historic condition and meeting the sort of lifestyle aims of the project.
Yeah.
Well, thank
Yeah,
you. Yeah, thanks for being very detailed with that. That is very helpful. Actually, as I was looking at it, I kind of was thinking that it almost is helpful to have it at that angle. That it shows that it's not original.
Right. And
Yeah,
we're trying to strike that balance where it has the double hungs, it has the matched alignment, but it's not conflated with the 1800s structure.
But thank you.
Okay, thanks, Doug. So, and you mentioned the overframing. So just out of curiosity, how far do they go? Like, I mean, does, for example, do the shingles even remain, or do they just strip it to the sheathing and go from there?
No, we would strip it down to sheathing.
Right.
It would be tough to flash otherwise, but this is not original roofing. It's
Right.
asphalt from,
Oh, yeah, no, the original probably would never
20
lasted
years
that
ago.
long. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, very good. All right, so at this point, we'll see if there's any member of the public with a comment. There may or may not be, so I'll officially open a public comment period. The way this works is if you would like to make a comment, use the Zoom controls to raise your hand. If you happen to be on a phone, I don't think we've got anyone on the phone, but it would be *9 to raise the lower hand, *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Once we recognize you, we'll announce your name to recognize you. And when we do that, we'll also unmute the audio for you on our end. You will also need to unmute yourself on your end with the Zoom controls. So we'll officially open it and allow several seconds to see if anyone raises their hand in attendance to make a comment. And wish I had a little, I'll have to get a recording of that famous tune, The Syncopated Clock, to play while we wait a few seconds here to see if anyone has a comment. Well, don't take it personally, Doug, but it doesn't look like anyone, it doesn't look like you're highly controversial here. I'm not seeing any hands going up. Another second or two. No, not seeing anyone. Okay, so I'll officially close the public comment period. I'll make a note here that there was no public comment. So at this point, we have our deliberation before voting on the motion as to being preferably preserved or not, and the imposition of the demo delay. So fellow commissioners here, what I often will do is just kind of go around so that everyone has a chance to express an opinion. And if your opinion has already been stated, you can just say, agree with what the last guy said or whatever. So in I'll just randomly pick someone. How about Mr. Morgan? Do you have any comment on or an opinion on?
Yes, thank you. Chair, I certainly think the structure is preferably preserved. But I don't believe what's being proposed here. I mean, it's such a light touch, and it doesn't really impact any of the highly visible street side structure.
Mhm.
Very discreet, and it is very low profile and light touch. I have no problems with what's being proposed here, and any other. I have no other constructive comments actually. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Andrew, how about you? Any thoughts?
I'm in agreement as well.
Okay, yeah, I think Joe summed it up pretty well. Biff, agree, disagree, anything new?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would agree, and like I said before, I think the approach of putting this on an angle is actually, it was kind of interesting to me as I was looking at that massing and just how it does really present itself as, okay, this is a new thing that's being added, and the way that they're approaching the addition, and the fact that it's not terribly dismantling the old structure, I think is pretty appropriate.
Okay, and finally, Ed Neumer.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been stated.
Okay. Well, sounds like it's, again, as I said a minute ago, not terribly controversial. And if you want to hear my 2 cents, I really can't add anything. Biff, I appreciate your comment about the angle. I hadn't really, at first it struck me as a bit odd, but I think you make a good point about that. Actually, both you and Doug Jack, his point about embracing the yard rather than kind of interfering with it, and your comment about making it a little more apparent that it is a newer subordinate part that's been added. I think both of those make sense. Okay, well then let's proceed to a motion. The motion that is would be in order is that the structure is preferably preserved, which would impose a demolition delay, and we can have another vote after that, since it sounds like we are generally like the plans, to see if we want to release the demo delay. So do I hear anyone care to make that motion?
Yes, I'll move that 8 Forester is preferably preserved.
That sounded like Joe Morgan. Okay, thank you,
Yes.
Joe. Is that seconded?
I will second that. This is Biff.
Biff, all right, thank you, Biff. Okay, so a yes vote imposes the 1-year demo delay, which, as I said before, we can vote to release in a couple minutes. And a no vote means that it's not preferably preserved. So going around the horn again, Andrew Bernhardt, your vote?
Yes.
That was a yes, right? Okay, Biff?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Thank you. Ed Neumer?
Yes,
Thank you. And the chair agrees. So we're again unanimous that the structure is preferably preserved and a demolition delay is imposed. So I wonder if there's, either a comment is in order or a motion would also be in order that the plans as presented are acceptable to the commission, and we could so accept those plans and lift the demolition delay. Would anyone have either a comment or make that motion?
I make the motion that the plans are acceptable and lift the delay.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Is there a second for that?
I second it.
Okay, so I think that was Ed, right?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ed. Okay, so let's go around the horn one more time. 1 second here. Okay, Andrew, your vote on that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Biff, Paus,
Yes.
thank you. Joe Morgan,
Yes.
thank you. And Ed Neumer?
Yes,
Okay, and myself, the chair, will make that one unanimous. So what that means, Doug, is that you have the demolition delay was in effect for a minute or two, and you and the owners can proceed with this particular addition. We appreciate both your attention to detail in your application and your creative solution to their living space problem, and wish you good luck.
Thank you so much. And
Okay.
just a technical question, is
Yes.
there a specific document that we bring to the building department now to proceed?
What happens is that this board, namely myself, I send an email to Caitlin, who is with the planning department, and also it's copied to Jennifer Blanchet, the zoning enforcement officer, and so on, about all the decisions we make tonight. So they will be informed that as to what the votes were, and that in this case they'll be informed that the building commissioner should be informed that he is free to issue building permits, although I think you may have to go before the ZBA, right? Because your
Yes.
addition is oversteps that. I think it's either the rear, I think it's the
The rear.
side. Rear, is it the rear?
It's the rear.
Setback. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, I knew it was
yep.
one of them. So you'll have to,
Great.
do you already have a date for the ZBA?
We do. I think it's
Okay.
in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah. All right. So you have the green light from us, but you'll need, of course, they're okay to extend that it's prior pre-existing variance,
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. All righty. Let's see if hang on a second here. Look at the attendee list. And I see Mr. Becker has joined us. So we'll go back to the item that would have been first, which is the hang on a second. I think I'm gonna make this up here. Just give me a moment here to straighten out my notes, if you don't mind. Okay. So we have another demolition delay hearing. This one is Forester Street. Excuse me, not Forester Street. We just left that. It's 5 Buck Street. I believe Benjamin Becker is the builder. He's going to be going through this. So we have another, basically a slight variation in that this was deemed historically significant and preferably preserved in 2019, and plans either as is or modified, I honestly can't remember, were okay, and they made some, they had a project, and now they're making another change to that. So I talked to Caitlin about this, and apparently Jennifer and Caitlin are of the opinion that we need to have a vote reconfirming that the structure is or is still historically significant and considered for preservation. And then we'll go on to the review of the proposed plans and so on. So Mr. Becker, your audio was enabled on our side. Is there anything you'd like to say as far as we have to first take this vote on historical significance? Any comments on that, or should we just go ahead and do that?
No, I was just under the understanding that it was already deemed historically significant in 2019, which is
Right.
4 years ago. So I don't, if we have to do it again, then so be it. But
yeah, well, we're really just kind of confirming. And Caitlin is, as you can see on the screen, is showing that memo from August of 2019, signed by yours truly. So is there a motion that the structure is or is still historically significant and considered for preservation? Nobody wants to
I make
make
a
such a
motion for historically significant and considered for preservation.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah,
Is there a second? Did someone second that?
I second it, Glenn.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Okay, so we're basically confirming that our opinion hasn't changed since August of 2019, and whatever changes may or may not have happened in the interim, it's historically significant and should be considered for preservation. So Andrew, your vote on that?
yes.
Thank you. Biff?
Yes.
Thank you. Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Thank you. Ed Neumer?
Yes.
Thank you. And the chair is in agreement. So another unanimous one. So, so now Mr. Becker will, it's called the demolition plan review. In this case, there's not much demolishing going on, more of a small build there. So, but anyway, why don't you basically just go through what it is that you plan to do to this particular structure.
Right, so at the top of it, there's the existing right elevation shows a like a bay window bump out. And so basically we're adding on top of that. That's one of the kids' bedrooms right now, and it's pretty small, and so we're just trying to make it a little bit bigger without expanding the footprint of the home. So that's the gist of it.
Yeah, I guess it's not a lot to say, huh? So I did it. Quick question. So is it the intent to make it look almost like it was built that way from the beginning? In other words, take whatever details in the current roof and basically just move it up to the second story, essentially?
Correct, and we're gonna tie in the fascia that when we did the dormer addition back in, it was 2020, it was right when COVID started. We did that dormer addition on the third floor, so we're gonna tie it into the existing fascia and aerial trim up there. So yeah, we're trying to make it look like it's always been there. I guess one of the differences with this is that we're gonna be taking out a window on the existing bay window, or the existing bay, and we're going to be putting in a transom because there's going to be a fireplace that goes, gas insert fireplace that goes on the inside. So we're putting a transom above it. It's going from a double hung to a transom.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I missed that first time around. I see it now. And that on the proposed right elevation, you can see that small transom window there. Okay. So actually, so technically your dashed line showing the area affected probably should have included that, but all right. Any questions for Mr. Becker from the board? If not, we'll do a brief public hearing. Any thoughts from the board or questions on this? Not necessarily deliberating it yet. We'll deliberate it after the public hearing. Not seeing any hands or anything. So I will again open a brief public comment period. So the same thing applies. The trick is to raise your hand if you would like to make a comment. And as always with these, the comments would be around the historical, nature of things. It's not the duty of this board to address other issues like, noise concerns or, those types of things. And not seeing any hands. Let me allow another few seconds. Okay, doesn't look like there's any public comment to be made, so I'll officially close the public comment period. So, and we will have our deliberation amongst ourselves here then. I'll pick someone else to start with. Andrew, since you're near the top of my list here, any thoughts as to whether you think this is an appropriate thing to do with this particular house? Or the real bottom line question for this board is there going to be any adverse impact to the historical value of the property, historical attributes of the structure?
I don't really understand the drawing. If someone could help me there. I mean,
Sure.
What happened to if you go over the existing structures, there's two windows above
Right.
that are removed. What's going in its place? I'm a little confused there.
If you go straight down, and I'll
Yes.
let Ben comment on this too. If you go straight down, you see where those two windows were is now a bay structure with 3 windows in it.
Oh, okay.
So in other words,
those very small. Oh, it's on a diagonal.
right. They look
Okay.
smaller because, right, exactly. They're diagonal.
But they're the exact same window.
Well, let's ask Mr. Becker that. Are they the same or slightly narrower or what, Ben?
They're the same width. They are shorter though, because it's gonna be an area where a desk is going, so
Mhm.
we don't want them to go, too close to the floor.
Ah,
It's gonna be a
okay, yeah,
desk height. So the same width will match the ones below. They'll be lined up on the ones below.
right. Okay. Yeah, I see this, the height is different now. I didn't notice that either before, so shame on me. But does that answer your question, Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So basically they've taken that bay, which is existing today, that's just one level, and kind of stretching
I
it
see.
straight up with some other, relatively minor changes to the fenestration in terms of the exact size of the windows and so on. And since there's two existing windows there, obviously those would have to, be removed to accommodate this bay. All right. Any thoughts on that plan, Andrew, or do you want to think about it?
I'd like to think about it.
Okay. How about Ed? Any thoughts from you on this?
I don't have any immediate thoughts or questions.
Okay. Biff, how about you?
I think my only reactions are to the negatively anyway, are to the window heights, both the upper level, and then just adding the transom. I understand the purpose of it, but it's just as far as like the fenestration across that side, I think it's the only thing I'm having a little trouble with. But otherwise, I think it does seem appropriate, and I think since most of that side, I mean, with the added dormers, I'm not sure how much is being affected there. But yeah, I think it's that window height, just because all the other windows, I mean, it's really obvious when you look at like the existing elevations, how all the window heights are, real symmetrical and lined up. So I think that's the only thing that's just kind of
Right.
just caught my eye, I guess.
Right. Not that it's my job to either defend or detract this particular design, but I would just point out that sometimes these drawings can be a little bit deceptive. And in this case, that particular side is just fairly, just a relatively narrow driveway away from the house right next door. So there's not a heck of a lot of visibility to that facade from any public way or anything. Any comments from you, Mr. Becker, on this question?
I mean, the windows on the second floor, even on the existing house, are shorter in height anyway, and that's pretty typical across many historic homes in the report. So, but I agree that the ones that are on this second, on the addition of the bay, are even shorter than that. So, I mean, but I think it's really for the function of the inside of the room that is the reason that we're doing it. And those ones don't have grills on them. Only that one in the center has the same matching grills that the other ones have. So the 2/2, but the ones on the side are just there's no grids.
And no muntins, is that, and that's the existing condition of those, I assume?
Correct, yeah.
Is that because I know a lot of times in those bays, those side windows are significantly narrower? Is that the case here?
Exactly, yeah. It would have made the light pattern look like a jail cell or something.
Yeah, I know. When they're narrow windows like that, it becomes inadvisable to divide it up into tiny little panes. Okay, thank you. Joe Morgan, any thoughts or comments?
Excuse me. Yeah, I have a question. Couple of questions, actually. I assume that we're looking at that. The commission is reviewing this because is this a roof line change?
Correct.
I believe that is the reason, yes.
A partial
This-
roof line change.
It's a very minimal change. So
Yeah, yep.
it's okay. But still, it triggers our review.
Right.
And my second question is, the architect mentioned a fireplace? Are you looking at a natural gas fireplace or a wood stove, or what are you looking at?
Natural gas.
Natural gas, and so the flue would just be through wall, right in the center there of the
Correct.
blank space.
Yep.
Okay. All right, and you have enough clearance then in front, on the side
Oh.
windows there?
From the side, yes, the transom. I believe we do too, but we're gonna have to figure out what unit they pick first for that. So, because there's different clearances from different units, so.
Right,
I'd be more concerned about the transom above than the side windows. I think we're good there.
there are no code requirements relative to window proximity to an enclosed NG fireplace. Are there any code requirements that you're aware of?
For the vent, I believe it has to be like, I think it's 3 or 4 feet from an operable window. I believe.
Okay, so once you find out that the specs on your fireplace, you may need to alter this. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, it's just, no, we just need to pick a unit that's gonna accommodate this plan is what it is.
Okay, very good. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make a note of that. That the plan is to pick a fireplace, a gas fireplace appliance that will meet code requirements with the window configuration they currently have designed here. All right. Well, work with the design. Okay, thank you, Ben. I can be so informal. Meanwhile, Andrew or Ed, now that we've heard from more people, any other comments that are
No, I'm fine with this.
okay.
I still don't have anything. Glenn.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. It's not mandatory. Let me think for a second if I had any questions. I'm thinking not, I hear what you're saying about the second floor windows being shorter. And while what Mr. Becker said is correct, it's quite common for the second story windows to be not as tall as first story. There is that discrepancy between these 3 in the bay and the other one that's existing on the second floor. However, the only person that's no one's going to see that except the owner and maybe the next door neighbor when they look out their side window or something, because it's concealed both by being back in the driveway and by the fact that it's sort of hidden behind that bay. And I'm looking at that front elevation, the proposed front elevation, and the fact that it's a little annoying that it's a different height. I'm not sure I would, my feelings are a little bit like they were in 2019, that, back then there was, as you can imagine, there was a lot of angst about putting this fairly large dormer on and doing some of these other changes. They were amplifying the volume of the house fairly significantly. But unfortunately, you can't see what the house was like before. It had kind of an accumulation of various, let's just say, not the best designed additions that were made over a long period of time. And it was architecturally, it was it was bad. It was bad. And we decided that even though a lot of these things might be suboptimal, the overall effect would probably be an improvement over what had been there. Yeah, like if you look at the photographs, you can see, I mean, it looks, you can tell that it was a late 18th century, 19th century house that has been added on to accommodate either growing families or contemporary needs or whatever. But it's not, it's not an eyesore by any stretch, at least in my opinion anyway. Any other comments? If not, we can go to a motion that the appropriate motion at this point is that it's preferably preserved as it's historically significant and preferably preserved. That would impose the demo delay, which we can then talk about whether we want to keep in place, lift with conditions, or whatever we want to do. Does anyone care to make that particular motion?
Yes, I'll move that $5 is preferably preserved.
All right, hang on a second. I just lost my place here. Where are we? Foster. Sorry about that. Hang on a second. $5. Okay. So that was Joe Morgan. Thank you, Joe.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second for that?
I could second that. This is Biff.
Thank you, Biff. Okay, so let's go around our horn here. Mr. Bernhardt, your vote on preferably preserved.
Yes.
Okay, yes, thank you. No, I just screwed something up. Sorry about that. Okay, yes, okay. Biff Baus, your vote.
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan.
Yes.
Okay, Ed Neumer.
Yes.
Okay, Chair agrees. So, so we've looked at the plan to upwardly extend this particular dormer. Biff, there's a couple people a little bit bothered by the fenestration, but at this point, I'd be either happy to entertain a motion to approve the plans, or if someone is really has a strong objection, to speak now. No,
This
that
is
was
Joe
someone like.
Morgan.
What
I
was that?
will, this is Joe Morgan. I move to approve the proposed alterations to $5 and to lift the demolition delay.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Is there a second for that?
I will second Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Okay. Well, Andrew, keep talking. Your vote is first
Yes.
again. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Biff Baus?
No.
Okay, no. Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Ed Neumer?
Yes.
Okay. And the chair is going to vote yes, I think. So you just squeaked by there, Mr. Becker, with 4 yays. That is just enough to carry the motion. That means that rather than imposing the demo delay was imposed, but now lifted. So as if you were, I think you were here when we went through this with the previous applicant, that will notify the zoning administrator and so forth. And I don't know if you have anything that is needs to be adjudicated at the ZBA or not, but obviously there's that as well.
I don't believe so, but
Yeah.
I did catch what you said earlier to the
Yeah.
previous applicant.
The only thing that I could imagine is if you don't have this side setback on that side, it would be an upward extension of a nonconformity. But if you already, it looks like it's only 10 feet you need. If that's this house's driveway on that side, you're probably fine.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, anyway, Jennifer Blanchet can help you with that if there's any question.
All right, I appreciate it.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Mr. Becker.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me go back to, and let me just change modify my notes to indicate that we did Forester Street first, and then we discussed Buck Street. Okay. So, hang on a second here. Something happened to my word processing program, and it wants to display 2 pages instead of 1. But and I don't know why it's doing that. But anyway, okay. Without further ado and delay, the next thing I believe is the review of the draft historical advisory report for 149 High Street. So this is one where Ed, well, you're free to comment on it if you've read it, but since you were not there, it's kind of a continuation of that thing from last meeting. So I don't think you should vote on this particular one.
Okay.
Okay, so anyway, hopefully you had a chance to review this. I think I had 1 or 2 people comment offline that they thought it looked fine, but we can either take it as it is, but if anyone has any changes they feel should be made, if I either feels anything is missing or should be added, you can speak now. I can either edit it while we talk, or if it's more complicated, we can do something else. But I do have the document available to me right here, right now, if there's any changes that people would like to make. So having said that, I see Biff has a hand up. Did you have a comment,
do.
Biff?
Yeah. A couple, actually. I did see there's just, I believe, a couple typos.
Ah,
There was one
okay.
I know that in that second paragraph, planning board are not already be aware of. Not already.
Okay.
aware.
See, it seems unlikely that the members of the planning board are not, or, oh, yes, are. Let me fix that. It seems unlikely that the
I had
members
to
of
read
the
it a few
planning
times
board.
to figure out what you're saying. I realized
I'm
it's
going
an
to
extra
change
word.
it to would not.
But
Okay, let me read you what I just changed. It seems unlikely that the members of the planning board would not already be aware of and appreciate the value in historic and historic. Does that sound like it makes more sense? Thank you.
Yes.
I agree. That didn't make good sense. The other
But
one?
more. There was another one. I'm not seeing it right off.
Mhm.
They're not really important, but contextually, I wanted to. I think we need to be more clear about if they're going to add a new structure. Several of us, I think, had mentioned that we wanted should be built out of brick and not, some other material. And it might not be great to leave that as
Mhm.
obscure, I guess, to give it over to
Right.
to ZBA, so they're aware of what we're, fully what we're looking for if they're going to add something.
Mhm. Yeah, and there were actually I heard comments both sides of that. I know that, and I see Joe's got his hand up. I know he had some opinions on that as well. Joe, do you want to jump in right there and express your thoughts on that?
Right. So first of all, just to reiterate where I'm coming from is I see the frog pond and the mall in general as a historic and cultural landscape that has a significant amount of history, especially from the point in time when Charles Eliot became involved. I find that Charles Eliot is a very compelling personage, historical figure. He was at the very beginning of his career, although he had already spent time in Olmsted's office, and he had just come back from an extended European tour. Of course, he came from a wealthy family. His father was president of Harvard, so he had the means to go and do the grand tour, and specifically focused on English style landscapes and parks throughout Europe. And he documented those very, very much in detail and brought that back. And instead of joining the Olmsted office as he was invited to do, he decided to start his own office. And this project, along with a couple of others, including a park in what do I want to say, in New Hampshire. I can't remember the town. What's the town next to Manchester? In the capital?
Bedford,
Where?
Concord,
Concord.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Could not remember Concord, but there's a park there, White Park, which was also one of his early projects. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that the design reflects not only whatever was going through Eliot's mind at the time, it was also a direct application, in his own personal application, of principles that he had learned in the Olmsted Office of Natural Landscapes and Pastoral Settings, and even picturesque, sort of 18th century picturesque designs. But he composed that landscape, even though it was a minimal effort, because there was not much money available. He did sculpt the pond, he sculpted the pathways, his focus was really on that natural landscape of the Kettle Pond. And he was trying to, as all of Olmsted's design, he was trying to enhance the natural features of the landscape. It's a small landscape, but it's our landscape, and it's Elliott's design. I feel strongly that of any of the historical landmark settings in the city, that one should be treated with a lot of care. And I think to place a pump house, a utility shed, those names sort of say it all, don't they, about what you're adding to that landscape as an obstruction, as an intrusion to those natural contours of the pond and its beach, BEACH, that was designed. That's what Elliott called it, as the way that he landscaped the perimeter of the pond. I think it is an intrusion, and it's not the right. The right design. I would have actually, given the two proposals by Chuck and Kim, I would have actually done the opposite of what they proposed. They started out, and their reasoning was a very odd sequence of thought experiments here. One was, well, first of all, they decided that they could not do a buried vault because of confined access certification, which is missing apparently by everyone on the DPS staff. That's hard to figure, but such as it is, they because of that, they said, well, we need to have direct at-grade access to a vault. So they weren't able to come up with something that was adequately concealed in the side of the embankment. So they dropped that. They dropped the whole concept of the vault, and they proceeded to an at-grade superstructure or above grade structure. I think that I would have gone the other way. I would have said, well, if we're looking for concealment, if we were to have a vault, it wouldn't go in the embankment. It would go basically in the footprint that they've chosen for the utility shed, and it would be concealed, and it would have a riser with an access hatch or cover with a submersible pump. Seems like that would be a very easy design if they had wanted to articulate design above ground structure. If that was what they needed to do for their lack of confined space certification, then why was the structure not proposed on the upper grade next to High Street, so that the actual historic landscape and grading of the Kettle Pond would not be impacted? So I would have actually reversed the way of thinking that they thought about the problem and come up with other solutions that might be acceptable. I think it's really important to articulate not those other options. I don't think that's not our charge. But I feel strongly that we should not accept any visible structure on the historic landscape. And therefore our conclusion should be one that really articulates well the importance, the historical significance of the designer Charles Elliott and his relationship with the Olmsted firm. I mean, he eventually, after the death of Harry Codman in 1893, I believe it was, he became a full partner, and he had a leadership position until his early death in 1897. But he was he died at a very young age, but he was a leader of that firm, and he would have gone on to do much more. So he is a historical figure in landscape architecture design, and I think that legacy should be preserved and respected. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Joe, before you go away, so to speak, I want to make sure I'm not trying to understand when you got to the point where you said what you would have proposed. I am unclear on where these pumps would be in your alternative view of things. I picked up the thread again that maybe if you have to have some sort of above ground structure, have it up on the top of the hill, so it's not, disruptive of the landscape architecture so much. But I somehow I'm not picturing where, how the connection would be made to the pumps and all that. I heard submersible pumps and so on. Did I lose something there?
My preferred solution would be an underground buried vault. And
Okay.
it would be it would be it would be close proximity to the pond. So it would minimize the piping, it would minimize the probably the pumping head capacity, the horsepower, in order to bring the water up from, as I understand it, it's pumping groundwater, as well as recirculating water in the pond and feeding the fountain, I suppose. I don't know what the full scope of that pumping is. I saw the engineer's drawing, but it's incomplete, the submittal. So I advocate for a concealed vault. I still don't see any technical reason why a concealed vault isn't feasible. I checked the certification for confined space work, and it appears that OSHA, the organization that certifies, offers a 1-hour webinar, and whereupon one can take the test as many times as they need in order to get a printed certification. It's not an involved training procedure, I don't believe, unless it's different for the city of Newburyport. But it seems like, there are many utility structures or underground structures accessed by one access point through a plate or a hatch. I just don't find that to be a credible response from the city. I think that the least intrusive design is clearly going to be an underground pump vault. And in addition, that would provide more of the acoustical isolation needed for the mechanical equipment. And it would make it, and it would still be visible, a part of it, because there would be a hatch or a plate. But most of it, I believe, all of the concrete structure vault would be fully concealed in the ground. And so, unless there are other technical reasons for not being able to do that, I still think that that's the easiest and simplest, if not the least expensive solution. That's in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, and in drafting the report, I was reluctant to get into too much of a design discussion, because it could go so many different ways, for one thing, and number two, that's really not our job. And after, in the intervening 2 weeks, I even had an interesting thought, which I'll just mention in passing. I don't think it's appropriate for this particular report. And by the way, the ordinance just simply calls for us to provide the planning board with a historical report that explains, so that they understand the historical considerations and the historical context and that sort of thing. So I really tried to focus on that. And towards the end, I said, well, the Parks Department has made it pretty clear that they are pretty strongly thinking that they're going to need to do something above ground at this point. So if the planning board, in reviewing, where they can get more into the nitty-gritty of what the engineering problems are or are not, and so on, if they, in their infinite wisdom, decide that, yeah, we agree that we should do an above ground thing, I at least try to point them in the direction of the Secretary standards, particularly as it applies to landscapes. And there is an actual section of documentation that specifically applies to historic landscapes. And the same basic principles applies, first preservation, then rehabilitation, and so on. Anyway, so getting back to my original thought, I had this thought that, okay, if they're talking about, or one thought was have it emulate in some way or fit in with the courthouse. But the courthouse goes back to what, 1830s or something? It wasn't really a park then. It became like Elliott's design was what, much later in the century, wasn't it? Do you know about when that was, Joe? Was it like
It
1880s
was
or 90s?
designed in 87 and it was built in 89.
Okay, so much later in the century, my thought was if they have to do an above ground thing, maybe they should do something that would be appropriate to that period. It would be obviously not the same period as a courthouse. It would, be some new thing, and hopefully as small as they could make it, and maybe make it in a kind of design that would be appropriate to that period of time, as perhaps fitting in with a park of that period. But anyway, that was just a thought, and I don't think it would be a good idea for the board to get into those kinds of recommendations or anything. But anyway.
Exactly. My sense is that as soon as we start responding to the design options or proposing other ones, then we're signaling that we're receptive to those.
Mm.
I don't
Well-
think that, and I think that's the point I'm trying to make, is that if we, as a commission, I mean, depending on what attitude we take, and I guess different attitudes and different opinions can be expressed here, and I think you probably need to express dissenting opinion, but my
Right.
opinion, or opposing opinion, I could say. My feeling is that to suggest support of any physical design that is above ground and exposed on the landscape is not
Yeah.
acceptable, period. So I
Yeah.
can't talk about whether we're talking about doing brick or concrete or
Right.
block or glass and
Yeah.
steel. I mean,
I hear you.
period.
And so Biff, I see your hand is either still up or has gone
Yeah.
back up, one or the other. You want to respond? And I think, and if you noticed, Joe just mentioned in there about dissenting opinions. I'm perfectly fine with having this advisory report if people feel strongly that they want to that they have an opinion that they would like to have included that I've omitted, then that kind of thing can be added. We've done that in the past, and we can certainly accommodate that. So go ahead, Biff.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, I'm just wondering, what would Elliott, what would they have done at the time with this problem? What would their solution have been? Would it have been to dig something and hide it in the ground? Or would it be to build a structure? And I was going to bring it up, and you started to talk about it too, about the, having it match the courthouse really isn't appropriate. I mean, in my head, I was thinking something much more, Richardsonian style, that you see a lot of in a lot of the Olmsted work, that they would put out, by a lake or something, really rusticated stone, similar to what, like, the old YMCA building in town looked like, but obviously at a much smaller scale, and especially when they're presenting the whole design of this thing. I mean, they're putting in basically the kind of curbing around the granite curbs around the lake itself, and then having a deck come out of it for launching boats and whatnot, which I think is a great idea, because that's there were boats a long time ago that people took out there for pleasure boating, and it's, I don't know when they stopped the stuff with the Yankee homecoming, doing stuff out in the lake.
Yeah, they basically stopped when the water was so dirty it was
Yeah.
unsafe.
Right, but so I keep going back to, like, well, so what would they have done to solve this at that time? And I don't know that it would have been to bury it, but it definitely wouldn't be to put the kind of random looking shack that they presented to us at a kind of a random angle just so that it was close to where they wanted it to be. I think I guess what my point is, if they're going to do something, and I understand, like, okay, well, we don't want them to do anything, but if they're going to, we should make it really clear about that it should be, there should be some intention behind what they're going to build, because that's what I didn't feel from what they were adding. I mean, it's like, look at what, there's the playground up there. I mean, that's not exactly historical or beautiful looking, but it serves a very important purpose, and the community uses it. So I think, you have to kind of weigh that stuff too. If the structure can help make that pond usable and clean, then I think that's super valuable. But what they proposed, I was pretty, there was very little thought, and the touch on what they were building it on didn't seem to reflect kind of that history and the aesthetic. So I think just as, like, if we're not going to be able to say that later, if this is our only chance to say it, then we should say it. But I don't know if that's the case.
Well, I should mention that it is certainly any of us as individuals can, and I'm thinking about maybe doing this, can either comment in person or send in a written comment to the planning board. We don't make the call in this case as to whether they get a permit to do this or not. We just say our piece about the history and why we think it's important to preserve or whatever. And then the planning board takes that into consideration along with a bunch of other things to come up with their decision as to whether or not to issue a permit. And they might have a permit that has certain conditions imposed and so on. Joe, I think, did your hand go back up, or was it?
It did, Chair. I had another comment. I wanted
Sure.
to actually reinforce what Biff was saying there. The what if, they had the financial resources to do a granite border around the pond and then controlled water level via pumping back when it was designed in the 1880s. And I don't know if we can really speculate on that. I mean, the pumping technologies were available. I think I brought that up at the last session, that they were already being used to bring water to Boston and to distribute it for fire water, and after the Great Boston Fire. But so there were steam technologies and that kind of thing. For a body of water this size, I don't know what they would have done. And I think that I'd like to think that they would have realized some technical pumping solution. They would have done that. But that said, they don't have the technology that we have now today. I mean, to go and try to recreate some hypothetical solution that they may have built back in the 1880s, with a steam pump and a granite block house on the side of the lake, or even in the lake. Or in the pond. I don't think that those kind of solutions work. We should acknowledge what we want to do. We want to design a pond where the water levels are controlled, that has a circulating pump, and it's cleaned, it's filtered, there's overflow designs, there's some way to make the fountain work again, all those things. We should do what we want to do, but we should still be sensitive with the technology now that we have at our disposal. We should be sensitive to the historical landscape. And I feel that the kettle pond and the grading below the street elevation should be preserved. That's my sense. That's my boundary in my mind of what should be preserved. The playground, the courthouse, those are sort of, in my mind, street level kind of structures. And that's where a pump house would go also. So I just wanted to clarify that. And as far as the granite curb, I think, is actually eligible for the same kind of critique. It should be a very low profile curb, and it should blend with what Elliott had called the beach. In other words,
Hmm.
if we're capping the sludge in the pond and building up the beach with additional sand, then the granite curb should be a light touch, low profile edge that will create kind of a flush condition with the beach. It should not stand proud like a basin. There should not be, the existing feeling of a natural water body of water that's fed naturally by surface runoff. I mean, it should not alter the appearance significantly of the kettle pond.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay, well, so what would you like me to do? It sounds like I'm not 100% comfortable with, the report. Well, I'm not the one to ask. I guess you're the ones to tell me if you think I need to take this back for some reworking or not. The only thing I'm thinking based on tonight's discussion is to say a bit more. Caitlin, could you go down to the second page of that, please? Yeah, thanks. Where on that title, recommendations for the SPGA, is really kind of not quite right. There's not much of a recommendation really, so much as a advice or point, or just kind of some mild guidance, if you will. But that's really all I say is, what the secretary's standards are and how, they need to be consulted. And again, I really didn't want to get into a whole discussion of, what kind of treatments and so on and so forth, architectural, this type of discussion. Because I fundamentally, agree with Joe's point that the historically correct and preferred perspective is to do as little damage to the historic landscape as possible, and which means you don't put some intrusive structure there, or but I think we all recognize, even including Joe and myself, and all of us probably recognize that when in the final analysis they may, the people responsible for making the decision may decide that they want to do that for whatever reason. So I guess the question boils down to, would you prefer we just leave it as it stands with this kind of guidance pointing to the standards, or do we want to say more about, as Biff was pointing out, be a little bit more clear that, if it should come to pass, because it does, that first sentence in the next last paragraph, if the planning board finds that a new structure is required, then, and it basically just points to the standards. So we could, in that, say that, we have, these are, I'm not sure what we would say, maybe that the board discussed concerns around,
I feel like it needs to either be more assertive that we recommend not putting anything on there, or just to make it more a point of, as a last result, if a structure is required, then all these principles should be applied, and the thoughtfulness of its placement and styling should be considered. I think that's what I was, I guess, trying to get at. That makes sense.
Well, all right, why don't I do this? Why don't we pass on taking a vote to approve this draft report as amended? I'm going to have to work on it, I think, and I think I can present something that incorporates tonight's discussion a little bit better, and we can vote on it then. Is that I see another hand up. That hand
Yeah.
belongs to Andrew. Did you have a
Just
comment,
a-
Andrew?
Just a comment in that, I mean, like we treat anybody else. If they do need a structure, I think they should come back to us and we could review that it's in historical compliance. That would be my recommendation, that we approve the vault, and that's our favored recommendation. But for some reason, if that's not going to happen, come back and just show us what they want to do.
That's a thought. And the planning board has sometimes done that. I know of projects where they have asked for the applicant has made some changes to the plan or conditions have changed such that enough that they've asked for a second, or in one case it was even a third or fourth historical report. So that's an interesting point, Andrew, and I have made a note of that. And Biff, I want to capture your comment there.
Chair, this is Joe Morgan.
Yep.
Could I ask a question? Can you advise us? This is an instance where, and you had already brought it up, that we could attend the planning board meeting and express an opinion. But if we don't have, if this is really for, I guess, educational purposes, if we don't have consensus as a commission, we would go to that meeting expressing a personal opinion, a citizen's personal opinion on the matter. Is that correct? We would attend as a citizen.
Yes, technically, yes. The way I look at it, Joe, is from a pragmatic point of view, is that whenever I have offered public testimony, I have made a point of saying, who I am. They either know, the chair of this commission, or I'll, state that, and I'll state that I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission, but for myself in expressing something that for whatever reason was not within any report or whatever. Maybe it was some supplemental thing, or just an opinion that maybe I had that just for whatever reason was not in any written report or something, or maybe I wanted to add some explanatory comment or whatever. I do think from a practical point of view, if any of us were to go, let's say, to offer a public comment to the planning board, I think that even though they understand that legally we're speaking for ourselves and not the commission, the fact that we're members of the historical commission, maybe the comments might carry a bit more weight, just like members from the preservation trust, might get a little more credibility or weight than just John Q. Public, so to speak. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely.
Okay.
The main takeaway here is that you have to identify yourself as a commissioner, but you're not speaking on behalf of the commission.
I think so. I'm not sure what the ethical, if there's a legal
That's
issue,
fair, I think.
But I think ethically, yeah, I think it's appropriate to be upfront about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Chair. This is
Yep.
Caitlin. I just wanted to remind you or let you know that the applicant, the city, is planning to go to the planning board next week on Wednesday. And so
Okay.
they were expecting this report to be provided prior to that hearing.
Okay.
Thank you, Caitlin, for mentioning that. Yeah, that's important. Thank you.
Well, we can let me put this on my calendar. So it's Wednesday, the 19th.
Correct.
Okay. Let me make a note here. Well, if I assume it's at 7.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, worst case scenario is that I can, attend the meeting and present, a draft with the explanation of what the discussion within this commission is. And I think that what we could do is to give some kind of clarity to the planning board. We could probably have take a motion to see if the board would approve a motion that well, there's a couple possibilities. One is that the draft report can be forwarded to the planning board for consideration as a draft, but that it's still being worked on. That's one possibility. The other possibility is we could have a motion that the commission feels that that the most appropriate course of action is to not have an above ground structure, but if one is determined to be required, could we be consulted on that or something like that? Something along the lines that Andrew was suggesting. Any thoughts from you guys on that?
I think we should go with presenting that, we don't want them to build anything, but if they do, they should come back to us, and I think that would make all of us here satisfied, seems like.
Okay, so why don't I see if I can put that into the form of a motion that the motion is that the commission authorizes the chair to advise the planning board that to the effect that we feel that an above ground structure is contrary to historical guidelines, etc., and not to use Joe's phrase, not acceptable. However, if for whatever reason the board feels that one must be built, we would like to be consulted as to its design. Does that make sense?
Yes. Well,
So you want to say consulted or consulted and ask for approval?
Well, we don't really have authority to approve it either now or in the future. It's the planning board's decision as to whether
Okay.
the thing gets approved. And the planning board typically is willing to consult with us on matters pertaining to historical values. So they're not usually averse to that. The only objection I could see is I know that these things tend to have schedules, especially a project that's complex and involves a lot of different public bodies and contractors and what have you, supply chains, God knows what. So it's possible that they may have time considerations that may or may not impact how much time they could afford to spend getting back to us. So, that is something that we should be mindful of.
Glenn, could I just add a comment through the chair?
Sure.
Newburyport, planning director, just as a note, and this is a reminder both for this application and in general, it isn't required by the ordinance per se to have a series of reviews with the historical commission. So you certainly could request for the materials to come back, and that's not unusual. I think that's come up once or twice before, but it is up to the board, the planning board, then to decide based on that advisory opinion whether or not they feel that's necessary at that point. So thank you.
Yes, I'm aware of that, Andy, and I hope I made that clear that they would not be required to, and we can't require them to by ordinance. We can just say that that's our recommendation. Okay, so all right, so let me see if I can put this into an appropriate motion here. Just give me a second. I want to get this in writing, and then I'll share this with Gretchen too, so we can be clear on what this motion is. The board chair to inform the planning board that no above ground. Sorry about this slight delay here, but I want to, this is important. Structure is appropriate, and if one must be built, we would appreciate, how's that, being consulted on the design. Okay, so let me read to you what I just wrote down. I think this captures it. The board meaning the commission, I'll put the NHC actually, the NHC, that's us, desires that the chair, that's me, inform the planning board that no above ground structure is appropriate. And if one must be built, we would appreciate being consulted on the design. And it was about the briefest way I could try to capture that I think gets at the nub of it. Is that, Biff and Joe in particular, does that sound about right to you guys?
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so let me consider the chair to have made that motion. Does that motion have a second?
I'll second that.
I'm sorry, who was that?
I think Andrew was first.
Okay, okay, thank you, Andrew.
Chair, I'm sorry, would you
Thank you,
read it one more time, please?
I would be
I'm sorry.
happy to. Okay, so the motion on the floor is the NHC desires the chair to inform the planning board that no above ground structure is appropriate, I should say historically appropriate. And if one must be built, we would appreciate being consulted on design. And that choice of wording is because we really can't require them to do that.
That's all we can hope
Yeah,
to do.
yeah, we
That's
can
the-
ask.
That's the only further participation that we can aspire to. Once
Pretty
this
much.
leaves
Well, other
fire.
than appearing and making a public
Yes,
comment
correct.
ourselves.
Which I think if we should do, if we feel strongly.
That's perfectly
Absolutely.
fine.
Yeah, okay.
So that's the
Yeah,
motion.
Yep.
Okay, so and Ed, since you've been part of, well, should you vote on this? That's a tough one. Let's take the vote of the people who've been involved from the start. Andrew,
Yeah, I think maybe I pass. I
Yes,
skip.
that was Ed
Andrew.
speaking, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine, Ed. Andrew, your vote?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
And Biff?
Yes.
Okay, Joe Morgan?
Yes.
Okay, and the chair will be, I'll be a yes, and Ed will be an abstain. Okay. Okay, so I'll figure out how to do that expediently so that we don't, I'm sure Andy Porter, I think in the attendees list, I see that Kim Turner is here, probably listening to all this and wringing her hands probably in all likelihood. But anyway, we'll try to try to get things done in such a way that we don't screw up their scheduling. So the least we can do is that. Okay, before we totally leave that topic, thank you all for your thoughtful comments. I really do appreciate it, and all the the time you guys spend thinking about these things and expressing your considered thoughts. So let's try to wrap things up here. There is a bit of correspondence. This is really just an FYI. 30 Pleasant Street is the Unitarian Church. Technically, it's the First Religious Society Unitarian Universalist Church. That's the beautiful church on Pleasant Street. There's a possible plan to make some changes to their cell phone antennae. If you weren't aware of the fact that they had antennas, that's a good thing. That means that they have concealed them well. They are within the steeple in a way that has in the past been approved by earlier versions, I think, of this commission, and because they do have a preservation restriction on that property, so they do need to get our approval for anything that's considered a significant change to appearance and that sort of thing. However, that the plans right now are kind of on hold, so we don't need to take any action right now. but there are some technical drawings and things that not sure how much sense you'll be able to make of them, but they are there if you want to take a look at those. But right now it's just an FYI that will probably come back to us in the future at some point if they decide to go ahead with that. The only update from the chair was introducing Ed Neumer. So you all heard Ed's intro earlier. We kind of moved that up front since he was going to be participating. So that's the only thing I had. On the approval of the minutes, I had this brief discussion with Gretchen about a sentence near the end. Joe, did you happen to see that? It said the mall deserves better than a decision that is made due to sufficient funds. And I said, I think he meant insufficient funds. Can you confirm?
That's correct.
Okay.
I think I mentioned that a couple of times last time, and I didn't mention it this time, even though I'm still thinking about that. I would hate for that to be a motivating factor here.
Right.
I mean, already they put a value engineering solution to the brick, quote unquote, utility shed on the table. I mean, I clearly is going in the direction of economies because of because that's the way construction goes, right? That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So I got a feeling that the solution that's being proposed is being influenced by budgetary criteria, and that would be a shame.
Okay, so what you meant was due to insufficient funds.
Correct.
All right, that's what I thought. Okay, so on that, so Gretchen will make that correction. So is there a motion to approve the minutes with that slight amendment?
Motion to approve the minutes with that amendment.
Yep,
And
thank you,
seconded.
Andrew. I didn't quite catch who did the second.
Joe?
Joe, thank you. Okay, sorry. And Ed will have, since you were not at that meeting, we'll have you abstain on this one. Andrew, your vote?
Yes.
Okay, Biff?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Yes.
Okay, and the chair is yes on that as well. So that is 4 votes. That's sufficient to approve those. And unless someone else has something they need to raise, we can have a motion to adjourn the meeting. Unless you're having so much fun, you just can't stand to leave.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
That sounded like Mr. Neumer.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ed.
Seconded.
Okay, and Joe
Second.
seconds it. Okay, Mr. Bernhardt.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Baus.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan.
Yes.
Mr. Neumer.
Yes.
Sorry. Okay, and the chair is in agreement. So we'll officially call this meeting of the Historical Commission to an end. And thank you very much for your participation. Thank you, Ed, for stepping forward to volunteer. But thank all of you. We're all volunteers, and I am the city, and I put it this way: I express the appreciation on behalf of the city for your service. Okay. Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Take care, gentlemen.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Night.
Thank you.